call.
Who are you?
Star-Lord.
Who?
Well, Star-Lord, man. Legendary outlaw. Forget it.
We arrested these 5 on Xandar. Check out the rap sheets. Drax, a.k.a. the Destroyer. Since his wife and family were killed, he's been on a rampage across the galaxy in his search for vengeance. Gamora, soldier, assassin, wanted on over a dozen counts of murder. Rocket, wanted on over 50 charges of vehicular theft and escape from lockup.
What the hell?
Groot has been traveling recently as Rocket's personal houseplant / muscle. Peter Jason Quill. He's also known as Star-Lord.
Who calls him that?
Himself, mostly. He's wanted largely on charges of minor assault, public intoxication, and fraud.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know how this machine worked. Hey. That's mine. You son of a... Hey! Take those headphones off right now!
They call themselves the Guardians of the Galaxy.
What a bunch of a-holes.
Hooked on a feeling, I'm high on believing that you're in love with me. I'm hooked on a feeling.
Good evening, Elliot's on mute.
Elliot's on mute again. You know, you'd think Elliot would learn how to do his producing duties.
Well, I recall somebody reminding us to go on mute as the trailer played. That same somebody didn't say, turn your mute off after the trailer. So let's blame that somebody for what happened to you.
That is, yes, let's blame. It's all me. I can only blame myself. So to that effect, I will start us off. Welcome everyone to a delayed, but finally we're here, a delayed MCU review when we are finally looking at Guardians of the Galaxy. This is we meant to do this one a while back, but let's see. John had a birthday, I believe.
I got
Tom, some folks other had trips. I think Tom went on a trip. And I got sick. I got as sick as a dog, as anyone who tried listening to me on a previous Caffeinated Comics or on the Kicking the Seats YouTube show where I was in sad shape and really had a hard time talking. So decided to take a break, get back to 100%. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for everyone who's watching us on Facebook, on Twitch, on our YouTube page. Whether you're watching the live stream, watching this episode later on as part of our video archives, or listening to the audio version on the Caffeinated Comics Podcast Network, thank you so much for being a part of our audience, for your support. We always ask, if you like our show, please share our show. Give us a thumbs up where you can. Share us. Tell us, tell us what you like, what you don't like. And, of course, feel free to drop your comments here on Twitch, on Facebook, and on YouTube. We see all comments. And if you say something fun, we can even share it. That always happens on Twitch. I'm waiting for someone to yet again comment on Twitch how we all look like different stages of beards. So, anyway, so welcome back, John Clark, the co-host, one of the co-hosts of the regular Caffeinated Comics podcast. How you doing, my friend?
I'm 50, so not great.
Well, like Molly Shannon, 50, or was it 40?
Yeah, this is the only year that meme worked, and I got it several times.
Oh, Well, there we go. I'm glad I could hit you with it again. Also coming back as my Shaken Not Heard co-host, Dave Pinto. How you doing, Dave?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm going to act like I didn't just see you at work today.
Yeah.
We're going to act like it's a surprise that you showed up tonight, that none of this was expected. There we go.
Yep.
And someone else, he's turning into a regular on our show. I have dubbed him the Indiana Jones of mixology.
I was actually thinking there's probably a way of describing that, of probably underqualified and gets too much credit.
Well, there you go. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe you don't leave.
No, I mean it worked.
Hopefully you don't leave destruction in your wake.
Hopefully I don't. As long as I don't leave destruction in my wake. As long as after a couple hours I leave everyone entertained. I think that would be good. So I will take very much the compliment of being the Indiana Jones, and especially given how much we're probably going to talk about Indiana Jones in this episode.
Yes. And for those who don't recognize the voice or the face, Tom Jetner, who is again been on the show a few times. He's been on Shaken Not Heard, been here on the MCU ReVU a few times, and yes, has created a Guardians of the Galaxy themed drink for today's episode. So let's jump into it, folks, because there's a lot to talk about this film. So why don't we lead off with our 2-minute MCU review of Guardians of the Galaxy. John, hit us up first.
Well, this is the stroke of brilliance of Kevin Feige amongst all else. And I think this is the moment where we start hearing his name, because Marvel's riding on a high. As we talked about last time, The Winter Soldier was a great movie, and it raised the bar to the level of quality of the MCU. And everyone was just waiting for the second Avengers. We had gotten a third Iron Man. We had gotten a second Thor. We had gotten a second Captain America. We were not going to get a second Hulk. Let's just get to the second Avengers. And Marvel said, no, we're going to take these characters that nobody likes, that have never sold well in their own books, that many people don't know. We're going to take a location that we haven't done before. We're going to go out into deep space and never go to Earth. And we're going to bring in a director, and we're going to let him go. We're not going to have him be the Russos, or have him be Jon Favreau or Joss Whedon. We're going to get a guy who came from Trauma, the home of the Toxic Avenger and B movies like that. A guy who had done like Slither. That was his biggest claim to fame. And we're going to let him write it. We're going to let him completely redo the characters that people didn't know well anyway, and really give him his own film. And because of this is a heist movie. This is a buddy comedy. This is a sci-fi epic, and it's nothing we've seen in the MCU before. And this opens the door to basically any kind of a story.
Dave.
I think this is maybe one of the most fun MCU films. And I think the tone that this movie has is something that sort of ripples across the rest of the MCU going forward. I think if we hadn't gotten James Gunn doing this film, we may not have gotten Taika Waititi doing Ragnarok, and then eventually Love and Thunder, with sort of a silliness to it, but in a good way, with characters that don't take themselves too seriously. At this point in the MCU, Thor is still a very kind of stodgy, stiff character. And then eventually they lighten him up a little bit and have him not take himself so seriously. And I think part of that is that character and his world bumping up against the Guardians characters, both in the films, but also the kind of the tone of the movies bumping up against one another and sort of taking on that quality. There's a lot, I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of Star Wars in this. And it's the sort of the Star Wars film of the MCU. There's a lot of characters who have pretty obvious parallels to characters in the Star Wars universe. Star-Lord is sort of like a composite of Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, with maybe some Indiana Jones thrown in. yeah, it's just really fun. I love how this movie sort of really takes a big leap forward in expanding the MCU. Going into space, seeing this this whole other kind of universe that exists of that's basically, like I said, the Star Wars version, the Marvel version of Star Wars in a way. So yeah, this is a really fun movie for me.
And Tom,
this is probably in my top 5 of the MCU. I remember I saw this in August 20. I saw it in the theater in August 2014. My wife was pregnant with our first daughter, and I remember coming out of the theater of like hoping that some of the sound from the movie theater didn't affect our child in the womb, which thankfully it hasn't. She seems to have superhuman hearing, so that seems to work out okay. But this movie had a lot of difficult tricks to turn. It had to accomplish a lot. It had to introduce not only new characters, but an entirely different ecosystem into the MCU that we hadn't seen before, that actually we hadn't seen in any movie, really, with the exception of some bits from the Thor movies. So this, unlike some of the other MCU movies, didn't have as many. It does have the continuity shortcuts that we do see in other MCU movies, but not quite as much. So it very much had to stand on its own terms. And it accomplishes that brilliantly. We learn so much in the first 15 minutes of this movie. And I had to check the clock to see exactly how far we were along. In terms of the brisk pace, getting to all the characters, or at least most of the characters, and the setup within the very short span of time. And it accomplishes that by doing the thing that I think good sci-fi movies do really well, which is trust the audience to keep up with it. Throw as much as you can. You can leave some things unsaid and just allow the audience to fill the rest of the void of information with their own imagination. And it does that very, very difficult task very, very efficiently, and allows the rest of the movie then to do action beats and character moments and things like that. So it's a very, very efficient movie.
I like everything you guys said, but I will just say this: after what James Gunn did with the Suicide Squad, it's a shame DC didn't just give him the reins to the Justice League film, because he pulled it off. Again, a whole bunch of unknown characters in Guardians, that at least not known outside of comic book reading fandom, and did a solid job of introducing all these characters. And not only that, getting us to care about these characters. Watching it again, I was like, I enjoyed it more this time around. I keep enjoying the movie more each time I see it. I remember when I saw it the first time in the theater, I was like, pretty good. I don't know if it's the best Marvel movie, but it was still pretty good. I still ranked Avengers as the best up to that point. But watching it this past weekend, I was like, wow, this is a tight script. This movie doesn't waste any time. As you said, Tom, just gets you going, keeps you going, expects the audience to keep up. And wow. And considering that James Gunn even used the original villain from when the Justice League got together in the comic books. He made Starro the Conqueror work. Too bad DC didn't give him the JLA movie.
He made Starro the Conqueror disgusting. That is a hard scene to watch when it starts pooping Starros out of every orifice.
Which Grant Morrison does in his Justice League run when he introduced the Starro, yeah. And I want to say they even did that in Avengers JLA when Starro the Conqueror hits the Marvel Universe and starts taking over some of the Avengers. But anyway,
did they do
all right,
Sorry. Did they
I'm
do the
still-
whole face eating thing in the comics too? That was a part of the movie that was really, I guess it would be face dissolving.
Yes. Well, I don't think Starro did that so much in the comics, but yeah, for the movie it works. It makes you think of the face huggers in Alien. You know, there's that visual. Before we get a little too disturbing and a little too grossed out, I don't want to get grossed out because I'd like to talk a little bit about our themed drink for today's show. Tom, I know you put it together. We posted the recipe on the Facebook page and on the MCU ReVU Instagram. While you're talking, Tom, I'll pull it up.
Okay, so through various twists and turns, this kind of started out as a tequila version of what's called a Queen's Park Swizzle, and it kind of morphed into this along the way, because then I thought I could do things like a tequila sunrise with this. And it is the idea of a sunrise of there are 3 layers to this drink, and there are 3 suns in Xandar. Yep, there you go. You can see the 3 levels very clearly. So the method of doing this is on the bottom. You can put as much as you'd really like of grenadine. Grenadine is a pomegranate syrup. You can find it bottled, or you can make it yourself pretty easily using pomegranate juice and sugar. Then you put your ice in. In this case, I've got a nice spear, cut spear of ice that I've got going in here. But you could use I've used crushed ice, and that works just fine. You can use cubes. That works fine too. Then the main body of the cocktail is shaken into your shaker. Put in lime juice and grapefruit juice, agave syrup, and your tequila, and a bunch of mint leaves. And what happens in here is you can muddle the leaves a little bit, but really the ice should do most of the crushing and the imbuing of the oils into the cocktail. And then you can strain that gently over the top of the ice to get that still nice little sweet bonus at the bottom. And then put a float on top of Peychaud's bitters that have that nice bright red color that should have a bright start to the bright bitter start. And by the end of it, you'll go through bitter to sour to sweet over the course of the drink, with a nice sprig of fresh mint that goes into the top. So this is a mix of a bunch of different drinks that kind of went into this, and yeah, I think it turned out okay. I think it turned out all right. I think this is one of the better ones that we've made so far.
I still haven't sampled the Hugin Moonin that you made for me.
I gave you that weeks ago.
I know. I haven't been able to drink. I've been sick. I'm finally healthy enough to appreciate liquor again. So I'll be.
Luckily, I think pretty much everything in there is shelf stable, so I think you're all right.
Do I pour that over ice?
Yeah, just pour it over ice. Like, you can use rocks, small rocks if you want. I always have big cubes, or I try to have big cubes in my fridge. Like a big rock, and just stir it until it's chilled and diluted enough, because it is fairly proofy. That drink has a fairly decent alcohol content, so you want to stir it a little bit so it can dilute it. And the fresh herbs in that one are an absolute must. I assume the ones that Dave brought you probably have been either thrown away or used for some other dish.
By the time I saw him after that, they had already gone bad, so I didn't even give them to him.
Yeah,
that's fine.
That was probably, yeah. You're gonna have to go out and get some fresh sage and thyme to kind of complete the garnish on that one. But
I'll get some. Yeah, to Dave's credit, he kept asking me, when are you coming into the office so I can give this to you. And again, I was sick. I didn't want to go into the office and infect folks. All right,
I mostly kept asking that because every time I would open the fridge door and I would see it there, I would tend to just drink it myself. I do this to Elliot.
Oh, well.
that one is pretty good. I've had that again a couple of times. That one is actually pretty good.
All right, back to the movie. Again, what we like to do with the MCU ReVU is really give offer some insights, maybe to other folks who've already seen the film, or if you haven't seen the film, what is it about this film that really makes it outstanding? I don't want to get too deep into kind of the controversies that surrounded James Gunn. We might talk about that a little bit after we talk about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, when James Gunn will end up getting quote unquote fired by Marvel before ultimately being rehired again. But I will say that this, as you guys have said, this film I don't know how many people really expected this kind of film from James Gunn, considering his history, the kinds of films he's done in the past. And when you move forward and see not only what he's done with Guardians, but also the Suicide Squad and the Peacemaker series that he put together for HBO Max, another DC property, I was really astounded at the kind of heart that James Gunn's screenplays have. Am I alone in that?
No, I would. It's I didn't expect anything going into this movie. I didn't know what to think at all. But certainly the amount of pathos that is in the script, really from the opening sequence. The opening sequence is I forget her first name, but Peter's mother's cancer bed, and we watch this innocent woman die, reaching out to her son over the course of several minutes. It's not quite up level of punching you in the heart within the first few moments of the movie, but it's certainly trying to be.
I remember when I first saw that in the theater, going to the kid, for Christ's sake, take your mother's hand. Come on. But he's a little kid. He's in denial. He doesn't want to think he's going to lose his mom, and certainly doesn't expect to lose his mom right then. Then, of course, you get the payoff later. John?
Yeah, that was the first time I noticed that payoff. I must have seen this film maybe 10 times, but he doesn't take his mother's hand as she passes away, and then he runs out of the hospital and he's abducted. But I realized that what saves the universe is that Peter reaches out and takes Gamora's hand. For some reason, it never quite tracked to me. And I was like, oh, it's all about taking his hand. It's all about reaching out when you're fearful. It's all about trying to support someone and not trying to do it all on your own. Because all of these characters are people that are trying to do it on their own. Except maybe Groot. Groot's fine following Rocket, but everybody thinks the universe is against them, or the people that they care about are either against them in Gamora's case or gone in Drax's case. Every one of these characters feels like an island of one. They really don't want to be together, which is why they're put in a prison, so they have to be together. But it is about how they become a unit in this movie. And they become such a unit that when we see them again and again, both in Avengers and Guardians, they're inseparable.
It's funny you mentioned, with Drax, I met Dave Bautista, and we became kind of chummy there for a bit, and I was so scared that he was not going to be good in this film. And now it's funny because you see Dave Bautista, he's done a lot of films since then. He did a Blade Runner 2049, where he's also very good. So
Dave,
did Spectre. But to do some real acting in Blade Runner 2049, he has to act, and he's done a lot of films since where he's got to bring those chops. And it's again, this movie will do a lot to establishes Chris Pratt as an action hero. I mean, does Guardians, then he's going to do Jurassic World, and then the ball just keeps rolling by then. It's just a shame that Chris Pratt is so problematic these days.
Yeah, I forgot about that watching him, that the whole story around the first Guardians of the Galaxy was that, wow, Chris Pratt, who was the dumpy guy on Parks and Rec, he like got lost all his weight and he got really cut to play this action star. And let's all get behind him because, you know, he's just this goofy improv guy that did good. And now we're about like 6-7 years later. He's done Jurassic Park, he's done more Guardians, and now we're all kind of sick of him. And I felt like, wow, my opinion of him has been colored by the years. And what's always bugged me the last couple of years is that I was reading, and we may have mentioned this before, but Marvel is so good at casting that there was an article that said all of the second runner-ups for every part, and every one of them was like, oh yeah, that was really good. You know, like John Krasinski as Captain America. It's like, he would have been great. You know, and Emily Blunt as Black Widow, she would have been just as good. And Star-Lord, the runner-up, was Glenn Howerton, who plays Dennis on Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And now we're at a point with Chris Pratt that I can't stop picturing Glenn Howerton in this role. And I can't help thinking, as Always Sunny has gotten better and better and better, and AP Bio is great, I can't help thinking he would have been better. It's the only role in the entire MCU that I want to recast.
We can talk more about the casting job on there, because you mentioned Pratt and Dave Bautista. Zoe Saldana also excellent cast working. Watching this again,
Zoe Saldana was the trifecta of sci-fi at this time.
Yes,
she had done Avatar, then she had done the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, and then she did the MCU. So you know, she was probably second runner-up for Ahsoka Tano at this point, because there's not really an untouched sci-fi property untouched by Zoe Saldana.
Bradley Cooper also doing voice. Bradley Cooper, I think, was on a relative high point at this point, as well as Vin Diesel doing the one word. This is really the only time that in the movies that we've seen that Vin Diesel gets to sound like Vin Diesel is him doing Groot, because in the first Guardians, because everything after this, he's playing the child and adolescent version of Groot. We don't get the full baritone, I guess, that we would normally get from Vin Diesel. But also casting for Nebula and Ronan the Accuser, and we get John C. Reilly being our Flatfoot or a beat cop of the Nova Corps. It's just kind of a great little, like, oh yeah, John C. Reilly's in this movie, and have a lot of the movie does, particularly at the end, flows through that character. You know, he's the guy who gets the dick message, for the way it's described in the movie. You know, and we get the stinger at the end where we see him and his family over that's over the Sultan that we get at the end of the movie.
We also have Del Toro in the movie.
Yeah, I'm sorry for those who are listening to the audio version of the podcast of this show, not watching the live stream. You're not able to enjoy the joke that Dave shared with me in our chat, casting Dave Bautista as Phil Collins in a movie where he gets buff and hunts down the guy he saw drowning someone. In the Air Tonight is the name of that. Is going to be the name of that movie. Anyway.
Just love those tiny glasses on him.
Yep. I will say that if there's one thing, and Tom, for all the folks that you mentioned, I guess if there's one criticism I have of this film in the casting, Lee Pace, is wasted as Ronan the Accuser. He's really a very underdeveloped character. Just, again, he's an angry dude. That's his thing. That's his shtick. He's angry.
Well, can we talk about this? This is, I think, where the cliche of Marvel couldn't do villains until Thanos is, you know, I don't know what his motivation is. And it was confusing to me even this time around, because we're introduced to so many new things and they could have gone anywhere with it. So this is the first time we see the Kree, but we're told that Ronan is not Kree. He's Kree, but he's like a zealot that's broken off. But he's really working for Thanos, but he's kind of on his own and wants to kill the Zod. And I'm like, he has so many motivations that he has none. You know, and it's like, why couldn't it just be the Kree? You didn't have Captain Marvel written. You didn't have long-term plans yet. Like, you could have done anything you wanted with the Kree. The Chitauri are also thrown into this because we'd seen them in Avengers, but like the Chitauri are working for Ronan instead of more Kree. I feel like they didn't have a character, and Ronan the Accuser is a great Jack Kirby character. He's originally fought the Fantastic Four. I felt like they didn't have a character, so they just kept throwing layers on it, hoping one of them would be interesting. It's like you made this giant cheeseburger with everything in it, and you're just hoping, well, the cheese in the middle you'll like.
Of all the things thrown in, did anybody else catch the dark elf that was in the collector's the collector's menagerie? You saw it? Yeah.
I saw it. I saw also the little slug monsters from James Gunn's Slither, I think, were in there too. And of course, the Howard the Duck's in there as well, as we remember from that. I think I did pick up a little more on, I think the second time around, on the Ronin motivation of just like, if you think of him as a religious zealot, like, all right, that kind of makes sense. Like, it's like, all right, he's completely devoted to the Kree war on Xandar, and he doesn't care. That's just wants to kill Xandar. Got it. Like it there's not much there, but at least I could kind of comprehend. At least I could get my hands around it. Like there's no motivation as to like why he really feels this way, other than a vague sense of revenge. But it was enough to me that I could like, all right, he's planning on just burning. That's why he's got the deal with Thanos of like he just wants to destroy Xandar, and that's clear enough where it wasn't bothering me. Like in Thor 2, somehow it just like bothered me that I couldn't figure out why the Dark Elves were doing what they were doing. And this was at least a step up from that.
This classic comic book villain motivations, like, you know, I want to destroy the world, or I want to destroy someone else's world. True. Although, yes, and then I remember after Guardians, a lot of folks will ask, why does Thanos need other people to collect the stones for him? Why can't he just do it himself? Which will be a stinger in a future film, when Thanos will say, well, I'm just getting to myself. This is the first time we will see Josh Brolin as Thanos. They had just cast him in the role, so we got to see and hear him. I believe at the end of Avengers, we do see Thanos' face, no voice, and they would tweak him a little bit by the time Josh Brolin takes over the role.
But they tweak him even further, even after this one, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah. This is the first time I'd seen it probably since Endgame, and he was almost unrecognizable. I was like, that guy's really CG. And by the time you get to Endgame, like you can see Josh Brolin in that face. You can't hear.
Yeah.
Speaking of the CG, I'm going to give this film its props too. That years later, special effects still hold up fairly well. I mean, yeah, you can tell what's CG, but it's very well rendered CG. Certainly not Incredible Hulk level bad, like video game bad. And I'm just wondering when, with Guardians 3, what's the next step they'll be taking? I'm curious if the Marvel Studios is going to take over like the Star Wars franchises and other Disney shows and do the volume, maybe build one of those themselves to work in. The Batman, I had no idea that the Batman was filmed for the most part in Warner Brothers' own. Well, it's called Stagecraft. That's the name of the software such, but maybe they call it the volume. That entire chase sequence between the Penguin and Batman, they weren't even moving. It was always the background. So
Yeah,
Usually-
everybody's using the volume nowadays. I know Star Trek, there's 4 different live action shows on Paramount Plus now. They're all using it. There's very few sets. And I'm starting to see it so much where I'm starting to look for it. And I'm like, okay, if no one goes into the background, it's probably LED screens around them, because everyone now is in a gigantic hangar. Like there are bridges of ships in Star Trek that are like 3 stories tall. And I'm like, all right, you're up against an LED screen. I think we're going to start to notice it in the way we got trained to notice motion capture. But yeah, it's revolutionary. And once The Mandalorian did it, like that genie's out of the bottle. They're saying it's going to replace green screen,
which I know actors hope it will. It makes well, not to turn this into the Mandalorian Obi-Wan hour, but Ewan McGregor himself has said that it's way different working on the Obi-Wan show than it was working on the prequels, because in the prequels it was all green screen. Here he actually gets to see the world he's in. It's not so much green screen anymore. And not to get too far ahead, but I'm going to predict now that with the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special that will be coming out soon, I'm looking for a Mark Hamill cameo. Mark Hamill had reached out to James Gunn on Twitter at one point, asking if he could ever be cast in a Guardians film. And apparently they had a meeting at Mark Hamill's house. Like James Gunn literally stopped by Mark Hamill's house.
Well, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If Mark Hamill asked if he could be part of my pharmaceutical brochure, I would have a meeting at his house.
There you go.
Because that's all I write.
Tom,
we would do this podcast from Mark Hamill's house.
Yeah. Tom, I'm going to task you with creating a Mark Hamill themed drink that we can tag him on social media with to see if we can get him on this show.
Man, just told me to climb Everest. How do I distill Mark Hamill career? I would literally be distilling one of the kings of science fiction and comic, his entire career into liquid form.
We'll call it now.
It's at least partially green, both because of the Joker's hair and because of Luke's lightsaber. So I'll give you that much for inspiration. What causes it to be green is totally up to you.
Oh man, I'm finally gonna have to crack it. Well, absinthe is green-ish.
There you go.
I was really hoping I wouldn't have to buy green chartreuse. I feel like once I buy a bottle of green chartreuse, I feel like I've crossed some kind of line.
Remember, he did little known. He did do Corvette Summer, and also he appeared on an episode of 8 Is Enough, as well as One Day at a Time. He was Snyder's nephew. Yeah,
the original trickster on the Flash.
I am not willing to sit here and watch this podcast read Mark Hamill's IMDb page, especially because he is not in this movie.
Right.
He's not in this movie.
But you want to talk about Michael Rooker's IMDb page? I'll give you 10 minutes.
We could transition over to parallels between this and Star Wars, because I remember I came out of this movie thinking to myself, wanting to just send a message to J.J. Abrams, just like that. That's what I want from episode 7, which was about a year and change away from coming out. And I mean, obviously I was just going to swap David Bowie for John Williams, but the overhead shot of the Milano flying through nowhere, with the jets in the background coming over this alien landscape, I thought that should be something that should be in Star Wars. Like, that just seems very Star Wars and just kind of perfect for that. Something about the shot, the way it was framed, it was a cross between between Star Wars and like a heavy metal comic.
Yeah,
Well, it's
Dave,
funny
you were the
because-
first one to bring this up. What were your thoughts about that?
That me?
Yeah, you mentioned that it was like Star Wars right away. So
Yeah, I mean, there's it's we see this part of the MCU that's a little a little grittier, where criminals, the heroes are maybe not always the most squeaky clean at all times. You see that in Star-Lord and Rocket and Groot and those types of characters. And the scenes where there's a gambling den in a bar and there's all these dozens of different alien species hanging out. I mean, it's like you can't help but not be reminded of Star Wars when you see stuff like that. And I was just, I was thinking of parallels to certain characters. Star-Lord, it reminds me, his qualities of Han and also Luke. Hera, obviously, maybe a little bit of Leia in her as well. And Rocket and Groot are, I don't know, Chewie.
Groot's very Chewbacca.
And yeah, but then who's Rocket then? He's like R2 in a weird way.
If you could understand R2's dialogue, you might get
exactly.
because also we know from other dialogue in Star Wars movies that apparently R2 has a bit of a mouth.
Yeah, all the more reason that he's Rocket then. And just seeing these, obviously it's not exclusive to Star Wars, because so many other great sci-fi franchises and stories have done it. But the different worlds and species and everything, and how space travel is just so commonplace. It feels like as Star Wars, an MCU sort of almost tribute to Star Wars, love letter to Star Wars. I probably could easily say I prefer Guardians to any of the 3 Disney sequels, of the sequel trilogy. Not just because it's a more original story, but because I think it nails the tone in a more satisfying way. And that also is, I could say that of Guardians 2 as well, and I'm sure it'll ring true of the third one.
Would you say that part of the reason that Marvel was able to do this whole batch of unknown characters in a new setting and pull it off was that a lot of it is reminiscent of Star Wars? That
could be part of it as well. And you talked about the opening scene of just immediately making the audiences care for Peter and immediately making him someone that you empathize with, and they humanize him right off the bat. And this is a character that, as Elliot was saying, unless you're a real avid comic reader, Joe Q Public is not going to know who Star-Lord is, or really any of the characters in this movie are. So right off the bat, they make him a very human. Well, he is a human character, but they make him a relatable, sympathetic character, and then we are kind of thrust into this larger universe. I mean, I guess it's somewhat similar to A New Hope, where we see Luke and his sort of yearning to get off of Tatooine, and the only family he has are immediately killed early in the film. A little bit of a parallel there.
We also have a giant movie title in the very opening, not the opening sequence, but the first bars of Redbone's "Come Get Your Love" are set over this Guardians of the Galaxy that's like 200 feet tall.
Yeah, I think that this movie takes Star Wars a step further, because Star Wars has that lived-in universe, but it still has that wide-eyed optimism, and it's still got that flash of whenever you see a lightsaber or a gun or a spaceship, there's always that moment to marvel on it. And James Gunn just doesn't care. The characters are more jaded than Han Solo was. I can't see any of the technology. When Peter Quill's on the planet and he turns on a flashlight, it doesn't work. And I thought this time, I was like, oh yeah, on Star Wars, everything's grimy, but everything works. Maybe sometimes not the Millennium Falcon, but I've never seen a lightsaber you have to hit it, and all the aliens everything's kind of, the lighting is really low for sci-fi in this. Most of the aliens are just different colors. I'm not entirely sure were the Xandarians the red people. or were they the John C. Reilly people? But there's not tons of prosthetics. There's not like the big hulking puppet that goes by, and the big or like the big CG monster. Groot is probably the closest thing, and Groot's a major character. So I feel like this is a movie, whereas, and we could go on and on about how Disney has handled Star Wars, but Star Wars was trying to regain that like wow factor of the original trilogy, and James Gunn is like, it is such a Gen Xer. I feel that he's like, yeah, I grew up on those, but yeah, let's just get past it. And it's one of the things I found so refreshing about this movie is I was thinking like, oh yeah, is this a little bit Star Wars? Is this Star Trek? Is this Doctor? I was like, it's not anything. It's Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was like, this doesn't look anything like the MCU. And then I realized, no, the MCU is going to look more like this as we go on. Because this is space in the MCU. We've never seen it before. Every single time we go into space now, it's always neon colors.
And it's interesting, too, though, that we are introduced to the enormity of Celestials in this film, because nowhere is actually the head of a dead Celestial. We don't get any of that sense of scale very much from Eternals, when you would think Eternals would have really played a lot with that. They really lost it. Yes, at the end of Eternals, one of the Celestials was rising out of the ground and then ends up freezing and blah, blah, blah. But spoiler. But, we never get.
You're right. That one shot we get in Benicio del Toro's exposition is more massive and frightening than the Celestials in Eternals, which when we get to that movie is what the movie's about.
Yep.
There's
Benicio del Toro. This movie reminded me how disappointed I was how little screen time he got in The Last Jedi.
You're not going to get much more in Infinity War either.
Yeah, I remember when they announced him being in joining the cast of Last Jedi. I love Benicio del Toro, and he's got like 3 lines of dialogue in The Last Jedi, but he was more of an impression in this movie.
And we were talking about the casting before, about like how many great people like John C. Reilly. Oh, I forgot he's in this. Michael Rooker is in this, and we're at the point now where Marvel is so big that people who are not in great shape are wanting to be in Marvel movies. It used to be who's going to play Captain America, who's going to play the Red Skull, and now Glenn Close is in this movie. And Glenn Close just kind of stands behind a desk and talks to people. But these movies are so big now that actors and their agents are recognizing that you are going to reach the widest possible audience of your career if you hand Tony Stark an envelope than if you make this Oscar bait drama you want to make. And now everybody wants to be any part in a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
I'll do one. I'll hand Tony Stark an envelope in a Marvel movie. I don't mind.
The tutorial sequence is just in this movie is just great. I remember both when I saw it first and then on rewatch, that being one of my favorite parts. It's effectively a slideshow of the information about the Infinity Stones that we're kind of aware on some level that this is information we're going to need to know for later movies. And we get that one little joke that Chris Pratt gets while staring at all of this, and he says, "There's a little pea coming out of me right now," and I don't know. It's one of my favorite lines in this movie or in any of the MCU movies, because it accurately reflects what a more or less normal human being would that reaction to that big of an overwhelming amount of information.
There's all not to be ignored. There are, as you mentioned at the top, Tom, there's a little bit of an Indiana Jones influence in here too. There are the opening sequence with Star-Lord getting the orb. It's kind of like a twist on the opening Indiana Jones sequence. Star-Lord himself references one of the artifacts. It references Indiana Jones himself. And there's a time when it was even being bandied about that Chris Pratt could be cast as Indiana Jones in a reboot of the series. But again, I don't think that's going to happen now. I think even Kathleen Kennedy has come out and said they're not going to be recasting legacy characters anymore.
Yeah, she said Harrison Ford is the only Indiana Jones. However, she did say because Solo didn't do well, we're not going to cast legacy characters anymore. And then the next week, Ewan McGregor plays Alec Guinness's role.
Well, but he'd already been that.
So it was okay to recast them in the 90s, but not anymore.
I think Ewan McGregor now has played Obi-Wan longer than Alec Guinness did, right?
Yeah, he looks better.
He does. And yes, spoiler, they also have another Leia in Obi-Wan. So
yeah, recast. Luke is in this and recast.
And Luke, right.
Yeah, they shouldn't de-age Mark Hamill to be like 10 years old in this.
Yeah, just like a Hobbit technology to shrink, put his face on a little person, and then have Ian McKellen stand closer to the camera than him.
I just have this feeling at some point they're going to do like an Indiana Jones type series on Disney Plus. You know, the Disney paid for the IP. Maybe an animated series. Who knows?
I've always wanted an Indiana Jones animated series. I think that could work so well. 20 minutes of just getting an artifact. Just, every episode he tries to get a different artifact, he runs into a different problem. No continuity, no backstory, no inner life, just traps and running and guns. Just if you get like a Jendy Tartakovsky or somebody like that, it would be heaven.
They did with the success of Guardians too. They did do an animated Guardians series,
and an I Am Groot series, so a young children series.
Yeah.
So there is a Guardians of the Galaxy ride in Disney World. There are two now. This is one of the 10 poles of the Marvel universe, and this is when they decided they could do no wrong. And honestly, they have yet to do wrong.
I will say, because I always hear people complaining, well, at least with the Star Wars films, that they've Disneyfied Star Wars. They've Disneyfied this, that, and the other. And as I was watching some of the chase sequences in Guardians, I'm like, oh no, this feels like a Disney ride. It feels like they're putting this together to ultimately go into a ride at some point. I never heard complaints of Guardians being Disneyfying the MCU.
No, if anything, it's pushing it closer to an R than any movie we've seen before. We can feel it's toned down a little. And now that we've seen Suicide Squad, we know how much he toned it down. He's toned it down even, which is a series. So he's PG-13'd it. But yeah, we're a little grosser and grittier. There's a lot of sexual jokes in this. There's a one night. We know that Peter Quill has a one night stand in the beginning. Star Wars only has one woman, so there's another difference from Star Wars. But Peter Quill's a sleazier character than Tony Stark. Tony Stark is a womanizer, but yeah, we're pushing more to like the 14, 15-year-olds than going back to the 6, 7-year-olds. That being said, they did put out an I Am Groot series for 4-year-olds. So Marvel is good at compartmentalizing, and Disney's good at going, well, you get this one and you get this one.
It's funny you should mention that. I mean, Tony Stark will spend a significant amount of time on the Milano after Infinity War. And I'm wondering if at any point he shined the black light on the walls of that ship.
Oh yeah, that joke is in this movie. That's right.
Chris Pratt ad lib.
That's a Chris. Oh, I did not know that was a Chris.
Yeah,
Pratt
there's a lot of improv in this.
It sounds like one of Pratt's improvs from Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, I also think A Little P just came out of me was an improv because I was like, that seems like it was shot on a different day.
That it's on Disney Plus, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong. I wanted to pop in the Blu-ray of Guardians to see, because there's been talk of Disney Plus altering the films for the channel. I could have sworn didn't they say at one point the Nova Corps officer goes, "What a bunch of assholes," instead of "what a bunch of a-holes," or did
No,
they?
he
No, it
always
was-
said a-holes. I did watch it on Disney Plus today. He says a-holes in it. He said a-holes in the trailer, and I remember in the movie I was like, "Oh, you didn't go as far as saying asshole, did you?"
Okay.
But and in Disney Plus, John C. Reilly does say, "I may be an a-hole, but I'm not 100% dick." So I didn't notice any differences in my viewing on Disney Plus today. So I don't think they've touched. There's no McClunky in this. So take that for whatever it's worth. If you're disappointed,
Great disturbance in the Force.
McClunky.
Oh,
Oh man, sorry, Tom.
Oh.
Sorry.
that hurt.
We're hurting. We're hurting.
I had memory hold that one. I had neuralized that one, and now that
people
don't have
hate. Ever since the special edition, people hate these scenes. Oh, I got the fix. Is it put it back to the 70s? No. It's a word I just made up.
Oh man.
Add to that, we're not.
Well, there-
oh yeah, we're gonna change the Han and Greedo shot. Don't worry, we're gonna change it. We're gonna make it more like it should have been. Really? Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Anyway,
As
Round
far as
about-
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
go on.
I was just thinking about audiences. We talked about bringing it up to the 15, 16-year-old level. Our lead character is a 15, 16-year-old in terms of his attitude and his attitude toward women, his attitude towards his job, such as it is, his attitude towards his father figure, his attitude toward the universe until things get really, really, really bad. And then that he goes from a 16-year-old to an 18-year-old, and just that little more sense of responsibility.
Yeah, it's that Tony Stark arc. Tony Stark goes from a 19-year-old to a 22-year-old in the first Iron Man. And then in the later movies he jumps to a 45-year-old. But yeah, it's a little bit of that, like I'm responsible, but I'm still kind of like a slacker layabout. I'm not going to take that much responsibility. That's as much of a character arc as you're going to get.
Well, no matter what the character arc might be, a lot of that's going to get undone. Again, Infinity War, it's ahead of us, where Star-Lord is essentially the reason why, the snap happens in the first place. So,
is that why people don't like Chris Pratt anymore?
No, I wish it were that simple, but I wish it were.
Because if Glenn Howerton had done it, we might not
Glenn
be seeing
Howerton
Always Sunny season 15.
We can't stay mad at Glenn Howard. Glenn Howerton's character has done so many worse things on Always Sunny than Star-Lord has ever done in any of the Marvel movies.
Yeah, Star-Lord doesn't have duct tape in his trunk.
Wow. All right. Let's go around the horn again with closing thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy and looking forward to our next film, Age of Ultron. I'll start with you, Dave.
Yeah, just to kind of echo, what everyone else has said and repeat what I said earlier. I love the tone of this movie. I think this movie sort of not paved the way for future films, but the tone, sort of the playfulness and a little bit of almost irreverence. We'll see that in many Marvel films going forward, and the type of humor as well. I love, again, some of the more obvious Star Wars parallels. I love we didn't talk about it a ton, but the use of music in this film, as well as the sequel. And I'm sure everyone's as excited to see the soundtrack for the third one as well. It had been a number of years since I had watched this one, but going back and watching again, I still rank it very highly.
Go on, Tom.
To piggyback off of what Dave said, I think maybe my memorable things from this is I think one of the final sequences of the movie of going through that final montage of bringing together all of the elements that make it great in terms of the characters, the use of the score, the pathos and the kind of emotional weight to that, and you get all of that set to Marvin Gaye and Tammy Tyrell. Ain't No Mountain High Enough. Just it has brought tears to my eyes in that final sequence of listening to the music and seeing the reactions are just it's just terrific, and I think that kind of encapsulates just how good this whole movie is.
John, they bring up the music. Does James Gunn get to make the movie like this if Ike Perlmutter is still in charge at Marvel?
Is Ike gone at this point? Because I remember when we get to Volume 2, you're gonna hear George Harrison and I remember in the theater going, "Oh, we can afford a Beatle now." This is
well, they got Michael. I would say they end with Michael Jackson, and that's not cheap. Michael Jackson,
but for the most part, this is like a Reservoir Dogs soundtrack, because it even uses "Hooked on a Feeling," which Reservoir Dogs uses, and "Come and Get Your Love." I had never heard as a lifetime musician. It then got used for Bill Burr's animated series Efforts for Family, so I've heard it a billion times. But for the most part, he was digging and getting like way more deep cuts, and setting it all in the late 70s. We're gonna get, as you said, Volume 2. We're gonna get more, and we're gonna get bigger, more expensive artists. And by Volume 2, Ike Perlmutter is out of the picture. Who is, if you haven't been following the show, the penny pinching billionaire who bought Marvel and nearly ran into the ground in the 90s, and still benefits financially from Marvel, but has been ousted creatively. And he's out of the decision-making process because as Marvel became the biggest thing in the universe, they were not going to argue about cost anymore.
And the piggyback on that, of course, James Gunn is going to take it up another level in Volume 2. People are going to be collecting James Gunn movie soundtracks like they were doing with Quentin Tarantino. So that is, I agree. We don't give the music enough credit, especially when you see what he does with Peacemaker. And James Gunn will go on and on about why each film, the music that he picks for each of his films is very specific to those characters. It really reflects on them a lot. So it is, again, a lot of heart. That music is a character in and of itself.
Yeah, James Gunn's up there with, as you said, Quentin Tarantino, Scorsese, and Wes Anderson in terms of choosing music.
And it's great that he's able to, that he doesn't get told, no, we can't get the rights to this or that. Although it's interesting that if you ask Amazon to play the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack, the first thing Amazon pops up is an album of covers. You have to specifically ask for the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 soundtrack before you get the actual music from the movie. So.
Does anyone have a favorite needle drop in this movie? I said mine. If anyone go around the horn.
Man, I'm telling you, the "I'm Not in Love" song in the very beginning. That was my personal anthem when I was a kid. And to hear that in the very beginning in that scene, it was like, oh man, Gunn was going for the feels. He knew something. There was something there, and boom, that was like Yondu's arrow whistle, whistling arrow, boom, right there, right in the heart.
Yeah, Cherry Bomb, it hits pretty hard to go in the complete opposite direction. That's it's a really good needle drop for the gearing up montage. And again, a song I had heard before, but not in a really long time.
Dave,
I would say my liking would be Hooked on a Feeling.
It's got a beat. You can dance to it. Of course, the Pina Colada song, too. About two very horrible people.
I always wondered about that song because it ends with them like they're both planning to cheat on each other. Then they meet and they realize that they were going to cheat on each other with each other. I need a sequel to that song. Like, do they break up or are they into this? Do they go into three ways? It's like it raises more questions than it answers. It was also in 1979, so all of these are possible.
This is true.
Pre-AIDS.
All right. I'm sorry, Tom. What was your needle drop?
My favorite was Marvin Gaye and Tammy Tyrell. Ain't no mountain high enough. Yeah, there's a bridge in that. It's like, well, it just they play that over the sequence when John C. Reilly comes home to his little girl, and having a little girl in my house. That scene always hits right in the heart. So
it's like you sit there. I was like, when the whole sequence at the end when Xandar's under siege, and they kept showing that woman and the daughter running. You're like, oh well, they're like, are they related to James Gunn that he's really giving them all that screen time? Oh no, you see the payoff later on, especially when John C. Reilly's character presents the Milano, the repaired Milano, and he goes, I had family here too. You see exactly what he's referring to. Everything set up, payoff, set up, payoff, set up, payoff. Really, and I will say we're not at it yet. The fact that James Gunn was able to top himself with Volume 2 is impressive. Is going to be even more impressive.
That'll be an interesting discussion. I'm not sure if he did, but let's save it until we get to that.
We'll save it until we get there. I know. All I know is I remembered really liking Volume 2. Even more than Volume 1. Going to myself, wow, James Gunn did that thing where you make a sequel that builds on what came before. It was like his Empire Strikes Back. You can tell that it was the middle act.
It's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it will. It will.
Oh, before I forget, I've been holding the Marvel Legends Groot. So, covering every movie with action figures because I bought action figures for every movie. We are now at the point where Marvel Legends is an unqualified success for Hasbro. This is a Build-A-Figure for the set, which included all the members of Guardians of the Galaxy, but was so popular they re-released him by himself as a Toys R Us exclusive. And I believe they re-released him yet again. And there have been multiple baby and teen Groots. But not only that, I believe 5 years later, after releasing the team, they gave us a Ronan the Accuser. In 2018, Hasbro went back for the 10th anniversary of the MCU and made characters that they missed the first time. So we got, and we'll talk about that, Iron Man in the Mark 7 armor was never made. Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter hadn't been made. Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane hadn't been made. And here's Ronan the Accuser. And as you can see, just as expressive as on screen. Look at that. I feel like I'm watching them.
And again, and folks, if you're listening to the audio podcast, you're not missing anything. That's fine. Very
that
good.
reminds me of when you talk about the audio podcast. If you're not listening to it now, to bring it back to Glenn Howerton, they do an Always Sunny podcast, and it's Rob McElhenney, Charlie Day, and Glenn Howerton. They're supposed to go through the episodes of the show. They don't, but they are doing what we're doing. They're doing an audio podcast, and they've added a video podcast, and they've separated them into two audiences: listeners and creeps. They're like, if you're a creep that likes looking at us, you can see this. So I'm fine adopting that.
Very well. Susan and Lehman are two most loyal fans who are on practically every time, are not creeps. At least, well, they're on Facebook. The Twitch is a little bit different. I have this feeling we have a lot of folks watching us on Twitch that don't comment because I don't know, they're doing things.
If you're on Twitch and you disagree, leave Elliot a comment.
Leave me a comment.
And you can also, wrong.
Yeah. You can also write to us at mcureview@gmail.com because a lot of times it's okay if you're a little bit shy and you don't want to comment right away or at that time. We are always happy to get your feedback, to hear what you got to say. On that note, folks, where can everybody else see you, find you on social media? Dave?
I am on Instagram at Pinto_Noir.
And why should we go to your Instagram? I know why I go to your Instagram.
Because of my little goblin of a dog?
Yes. Your dog. And yeah. Shout out to Lawrence Holmes, who was on our last episode. Thank you for sharing links to the video and the audio podcasts, making our Winter Soldier episode so far one of our most listened to episodes.
Cool.
Tom, should we follow you on social media? I can't hear you.
There we go. Thinking about starting a dedicated cocktail Instagram for this particular show and any other drinks that I may be creating. I've been creating quite a few now, but as well as I know that when I do uniform designs, some of the more things that people are interested in sometimes are my outtakes. So maybe a drink went wrong. And I think there may be some.
I've had that night.
There's been certainly I went through a lot of drafts on the Winter Soldier cocktails, two of which I believe did not make it into the show. Dave tried them, but they did not make them into the show. But I am going to start doing that at some point. So, but until then, I'll have to just kind of wait for that. Also, by the way, we were talking about Lawrence. Happy birthday, Lawrence! If you happen to be watching or listening in any capacity, congratulations on another trip around our single son.
Just so you know, Lawrence celebrates a birthday month. He doesn't just do birthday. It's like the entire month of June. It's his birthday month. So
that must be nice.
Yeah, it is great. I'm telling you. John?
I'm at Not On My Book on Twitter and Instagram, where I am fiercely unpopular. So if you want to follow me, there's so much elbow room. You can kind of take up 2 seats if you follow me. But you can also listen to Captain Comics. If you're not listening to the audio feed of this right now, you can subscribe wherever podcasts are sold for free. This week, we actually had an in-person podcast, which felt very pre-pandemic because there was so much streaming to talk about. So if you want to hear about Strange New Worlds and Obi-Wan and Kids in the Hall and Barry and series I'm forgetting right now, Stranger Things, everything came out this week and we tried to cover it all.
That Barry, last episode of Barry was mind-bending. Strange New Worlds is my favorite Star Trek series right now. It has supplanted both Picard and Discovery.
What about Lower Decks?
I'm just not the fan of Lower Decks that you are. I mean, I like it. I've watched it. I've enjoyed it. I'm just not. It's to me.
I love Lower Decks so much. Oh, The Boys came back. That's another streamer. That Jack Quaid, who plays Huey on The Boys, it was distracting because he plays Boimler on Lower Decks, and I've seen all of the episodes of The Boys once, but I've seen Lower Decks like 5 times. So I just hear this cartoon voice every time he speaks.
So yeah. But anyway, so give every other episode of the Caffeinated Comics podcast. It covers the news. And in between, we have our MCU reviews, which you can also catch earlier episodes on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Go to facebook.com/MCU ReVU. Do a search for the MCU review on YouTube, on the youtube.com, and twitch.tv/MCU review. You can catch the live stream there. And a recording of the episode for about a few days until Twitch takes it down. So everything, you're going to find it mostly on our YouTube pages and on our Facebook page. I also want to throw in a quick plug also for the Shaken Not Heard show that both Dave and I do together. We will be coming back with Shaken Not Heard. We had announced on the last episode of the MCU review that we were going to do a Bond retrospective and talk about seeing Dr. No in the theater. That didn't happen because, well, I got sick. Dave went to go see it by himself, and he got to see it with no problems, with no...
You guys are never letting that go, are you?
Yeah, no technical problems. This just only happens when I go to the freaking
It was a
movie.
scarring event for both of you. You know, anytime you guys annoy me, I'm going to go, no time to die in the theater. And I'll just watch you both drop out of your chairs.
That is the deepest cut. Right there, right in the heart.
The first cut is the deepest.
Yeah. And don't follow me. I'm going to throw in a cheap plug for my dog, Moneypenny, who is the official mascot of Shaken Not Heard. And yeah, she's the official mascot of the MCU review because she looks like Lockjaw from The Inhumans. So follow at Life with Moneypenny on Instagram. She's way cuter than I am. All right, folks. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dave, for another evening. When we come back in a couple of weeks, we will be talking about Avengers: Age of Ultron, the second Avengers film, and what will be Joss Whedon's last Marvel film. Was it as bad as people want to say it was? I don't know. We'll have to see. Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening. Have a great weekend. Have a great June. We'll see you again soon.